On the third day of the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court hearings, there was some drama, there was a tiff, if you want to call it that, by Cory Booker and Republican senators. And this was all over the issue of committee confidential documents that Democrats essentially forced the release of. Now, these committee confidential documents are only available or supposed to only be available to the senators who are participating in these hearings, who will vote on whether or not to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. And the argument from Republicans is, look, these are confidential documents because they're protecting the identities of certain individuals, and just releasing them is irresponsible. But Cory Booker was among one of the Democratic senators who wanted to make a point about releasing it to show who Brett Kavanaugh really is. Now, there are no winners, in my opinion, to this story, and I'll explain why in just a minute. But before I do, let's talk about what Booker did and what he wanted to talk about. Now, he released a document, an email, and openly spoke about an email that Kavanaugh had written back in 2003, and it had to do with racial discrimination. It was a question about the amount of liability the federal government has in discrimination cases. If they are accused of privately discriminating against people, what is the responsibility of the government? What are they liable for? And it appeared that based on this email, Brett Kavanaugh sided with not holding the government responsible, okay?
To which I say, by the way, of course, he's against affirmative action. So I don't think it's really breaking news, but it is annoying, of course, when he says, me, political opinions? I don't have any political opinions, that's preposterous. Or if I do, I'm going to set them aside. None of the Supreme Court justices put their political opinions aside. It's a total lie.
Now, let's go to the first video. Here is Cory Booker openly speaking about a committee confidential document.
No Senate rule accounts for Bill Burke's partisan review of the documents. No Senate rule and no history of the Senate accounts for what is going on right now. Senator Cornyn actually made a very good point. I knowingly violated the rules that were put forth, and I'm told that the committee confidential rules have knowing consequences. And so, sir, I come from a long line, as all of us do as Americans, and understand what that kind of civil disobedience is, and I understand the consequences. So I am right now, before your process is finished, I'm going to release the email about racial profiling, and I understand that the penalty comes with potential ousting from the Senate. And if Senator Cornyn believes that I violated Senate rules, I openly invite and accept the consequences of my team releasing that email right now. And I'm releasing it to expose that, number one, the emails that are being withheld from the public have nothing to do with national security, nothing to jeopardize the sanctity of those ideals that I hold dear.
Yeah, Cory Booker takes a good point and makes it unbearable.
Yeah, he really does.
So let's talk about the good point first. And I want to thank him for highlighting it, because I'm trying to get past his political speak to get to the core of the issue. So problem number one is that you're supposed to get all this information from the National Archives, but that takes a while. So the Republicans want to rush Kavanaugh through before the elections in case they lose the Senate. So they don't want to go through a regular process. They're like, we're not going to let the archives do it. So, but we'll give you some of his emails and documents. Well, who's going to give it to you? A Bush attorney is, because he worked for Bush. Well, that's not fair. That's not the regular way of doing it. So you have a partisan attorney for George W. Bush deciding whether the partisan Kavanaugh's emails, which ones he'll share with the public. That's clearly not the correct way. And then on top of that, they then say, okay, some of you in the Senate can see it, but we're going to declare it a matter of national security so the public can't see it. But now that the Democrats have released some of the emails, you see, they had absolutely nothing to do with national security. They had to do with affirmative action, how we're going to treat Native people of Hawaii, et.cetera. And they all had to do Roe versus Wade, political issues that they were just embarrassed by and they didn't want the public to have. So is Booker right to release them? Absolutely, because the Republicans are the ones that broke the rules in the first place. Now, the unbearable part is, I am doing civil disobedience here, and I am willing to be ousted from the Senate. You know they're not going to oust you from the Senate, and they're not going to bother doing any of that.
It's a way of him appearing to be strong without actually being strong. And that's the reason why it rubbed me the wrong way. So look, I think if it was coming from a genuine fighter within the Senate, a real, progressive within the Senate, and they were doing this not for political theater, but because they're, a person of convictions and all that, then I would have a completely different perspective on this. But Cory Booker, really, you're trying to pretend like you're a tough guy, that you're strong? Where were you when there was the obstruction of Merrick Garland's confirmation hearings? Like, where were you there? Like, you didn't have any strong words there. He might have said a thing or two, but he wasn't a fighter then. Where were you when it came to fighting for affordable prescription drugs for your voters, your constituents, the American people? He's not a fighter. And what he's doing is setting the stage for his presidential run. And it's so depressingly transparent. Yeah. And so he'll take, and by the way, one other thing. Look, I know that social issues are important. There's no doubt. Racial discrimination, especially right now in the current climate that we're living in, is important. But this is exactly what Democrats keep latching onto because they don't want to talk about corporate corruption, right? Yeah. They just want to focus on the social issues and distract us from how everyone is getting screwed over, right? The corruption in politics right now is impacting everyone, black, white, Asian, men, women, all of us are suffering from it, but they don't want to talk about it because they're exploiting that system. They like that system.
93% of Americans believe that the politicians represent their donors and not their voters. They hate Citizens United. This guy's massively in favor of Citizens United. In fact, in one of his decisions that they barely touched on, he thought in some of the emails, I should say, not a decision, he talked about how there should be more money in politics and that these corporations should be able to give more directly to politicians. Now, that's the thing that they should spend a whole day on because the American people hate that corruption. But since a lot of these folks take the same money, they let them off the hook on the most important issue. And by the way, so you guys can judge for yourself at home. This is what we try to do, is give you a sense of being able to do it on your own. How do you know if someone's actually being bold? When both parties come out against them, okay? So when Elizabeth Warren attacks the big bankers, you'll see the Democrats also be like, hey, Elizabeth, what? Come on now, hey, whoa, right? Yep. Okay, and that's when you know that they're actually doing something against the establishment and for the American people. If Bernie Sanders says, no, I'm not voting for the war, right? When Barbara Lee says, I'm not voting for the Afghanistan war, I'm not voting to authorize warrantless surveillance, that's when both parties are like, hey, Barbara Lee, what are you doing? Come on. That's when you know they're actually doing civil disobedience or doing an act of courage. This is just theater.
So let's go to Senator Cornyn. He is angry that Booker has taken this confidential information and made it public. Take a look.
He's right. Running for president is no excuse for violating the rules of the Senate or of the confidentiality of the documents that we are privy to. And I hope that the senator will reconsider his decision because no senator deserves to sit on this committee or serve in the Senate, in my view, if they decide to be a law unto themselves and willingly flout the rules of the Senate and the determination of confidentiality and classification. That is irresponsible and conduct unbecoming a senator.
So Booker wants the Republicans to attack him because that also helps his presidential credentials. He's like, oh, remember when all the Republicans attacked me and I was bold in my fight back against them? And I'm amused by Cornyn's hypocrisy there. Then you would be a law unto yourself and that's unacceptable. What do you think Trump's doing?
Exactly, yeah.
Come on.
That's why I say there's no winner in this story, okay? So let's go to one more video. Booker kind of responding to these threats by Cornyn.
There were very serious charges that were made against me by my colleague from Texas. I don't know if they were political bluster or sincere feelings. If what he said was sincere, there actually are Senate rules governing the behavior of senators. If he feels that I, and now my fellow colleagues who are with me, have violated those rules, if he is not a tempest in a teapot, but sincerely believes that, then bring the charges. Go through the Senate process to take on somebody that you said is unbecoming to be a senator. Let's go through that process, and I'm ready to accept the full responsibility for what I have done, the consequences for what I have done, And I stand by the public's right to have access to this document and know this nominee's views on issues that are so profoundly important, like race and the law, torture, and other issues.
Any senator, officer, or employee of the Senate who shall disclose the secret or confidential business or proceedings of the Senate, including the business and proceedings of the committees, subcommittees, and offices of the Senate, shall be liable, if a senator, to suffer expulsion from the body, and if an officer or employee to dismissal from the service of the Senate and to punishment or contempt. So I would correct the senator's statement. There is no rule. There is clearly a rule that applies.
Then apply the
Mr.
rule
Chairman.
and bring the charges.
The false bravado, and you know that he and his staffers planned that line. Bring it. Okay, you're no Kurt Russell in Tombstone, okay? Look, Booker thinks it's a political win-win. Either he seems like a tough guy and the Republicans don't pursue him because they're not going to. Nobody wants to waste that time, right? Or they do pursue him and that's an even bigger win for him because he's like, you see this? I am standing up to all the Republicans. I am the resistance. I released one email. Okay, whatever. So look, I'm torn on it because I'm glad he released the email and I want to give him credit for that. You should always
give him credit for that, right? But it's also important to talk about intentions. And are his intentions genuine? Maybe, but there's also an ulterior motive, and it's our job to be honest with you guys about that.
It's like during the 2016 election. Now, Martin O'Malley's positions were not so bad when he was running for president, but he was such an obviously fake politician. I would tell you ahead of time as we watch the debates together, he's gonna take off his jacket, he would take off his jacket. He's gonna roll up his sleeves, he would roll up his sleeves. Why? Because I know that's what consultants tell you to do. So everything Booker just did reeks of political calculation, and it's just, that's our job to tell you that. At the same time, great, wonderful that he released the emails because he should have, and the Republicans are dead wrong on the issue. 2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below. Then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.